Anyway, thanks for allowing me to speak to you today. I hope what I present is not too controversial, but I think you'll see that there's opportunities for us between the people that are looking at new earth creation versus old earth creation. In fact, today, I don't know how many of you today were in Pastor Greg's service. He was talking about the different philosophies today when it comes to creation with the gap theory and it was Genesis is a poetic assembly of verses, and so Pastor Greg went through three areas there. There's some new things that, whether it's the new earth believers, the new earth or old earth scientists, they're just now starting to see and realize what's going on. And there's a little bit of movement taking place in the science community, where the science community is slowly moving to believing in God. Now, not the majority, but more and more of this is happening. There's a professor by the name of Dr. Hugh Ross. He works at Caltech. He's a professor at Caltech. Yeah. He's a astrophysicist, astroscientist, pastor, and he was the founder, chairman of Reasons to Believe. So Dr. Hugh Ross came to faith in Christ. He was a Canadian, and until he was, I think it was 27 years old, he never heard a word about Christ, the Bible, nothing. He, after he got his PhD, a number of degrees, he started to look at different religious books around the world, trying to find holes in all of them. He came to the Bible from a science perspective and could not find any holes. So that started his journey to his research and his testimony today. So that said, by the way, in the newsletter, there's no handouts today, but in the newsletter, Butch will provide a link that if you want to go back and reference the material, you'll be able to do that. So, starting out with John 1:1, I find it a very interesting perspective, even before you read Genesis 1. And, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Basically, he says nothing was created without him that was created. So this references not just physical creation, time, space, matter, gravity, but also it puts it all together that there was one creator and one beginning. So as we go through this, it'll be very important to remember. And then going to Colossians 1:16, for by him things were created. Basically, again, it's affirming that there was one creator at one point in time. So what's happened, let me do just a little bit of history on the thinking from the church, from the old earth, new earth perspective, and also not much science, but I'm going to put a little bit in here because for the final conclusion it will be important. But one thing that the church probably doesn't know, actually, let me give you a little background on myself. I've been involved in technology pretty much most of my career, and working with some of the largest engineering companies in the world, and at the senior levels of their organizations. And to the point where I've been able to witness to a lot of the scientists out there that work for these companies, and try to be able to put a Christian perspective on what they're seeing in their research. So the engineering companies, they're not just building roads and bridges and dams, like Hoover Dam, stuff like that, but they have to look at other things. So I'll just mention one of them. There's a largest engineering company in the world is Bechtel, They're located across from Nordstrom's by the Galleria. That's their headquarters. And some of their research fellows are watching the polar shift. So the North Pole and the South Pole in the Earth here is actually moving. It's moving in the tune of 1 mile to 2 miles a year. And so north is shifting like this. So why is an engineering company looking at that? Well, if they build a road or a bridge, and the Earth's gravity is changing the forces on a bridge, on a dam. So they are looking at that. So, you know, working with these scientists that are way above my level, it has been important to be able to communicate with them, and because they're looking at science all the time. Typically, I think we all know in many aspects, at least according to people like Ken Ham, Answers to Genesis, science and the Bible don't always line up. Well, that's a perception, as we'll see. The Bible also, it's a theological reference. It's not a science book. However, God, in the words of God in the Bible, there's no areas where things don't line up. The Bible's not going to lie. God doesn't lie. But the biggest area that we have a problem with is when science finds something, is their interpretation. How they reason and put rationalization in things. But we also find this with whether it's the New Earth Christians like Answers in Genesis, great organization, but sometimes they'll find something and they'll go step 1, step 2, step 3 in their analysis, and then for their conclusion, they miss maybe step 4 or 5. So you have to read this, read the materials with a little bit of an open mind. Going down on the slide, there's an interesting factoid. In the Bible, I found that there's the heavens and the earth, that specific word group, is repeated 9 times. What this particular area focuses on is everything that you can think of was created, by an ultimate being. The next one, the phrase, the heaven and the earth, that's a phrase that's been repeated 19 times. Again, this focuses on creation of all things, but including your spiritual realms as well. So it is all inclusive. But I think looking at the discussion between New Earth and Old Earth believers is not to fight with each other, because what happens is I hear this all the time in the science community. Scientists will say, "Oh, look at those Christians that they're arguing. They can't even decide if they're New Earth or Old Earth Christians." So it has been a real problem for the church trying to reach out to the world. Dr. Hugh Ross, that I mentioned earlier, that's been one of his focuses, is to try to align the things that we're finding in science with proper conclusions in science with a biblical angle and perspective. And we'll get into a little bit more of this. But I think the things that we can have a commonality with the New Earth and the Old Earth perspective, again, is God created all things. In this creation, he also created an order. So John, being an engineer, is probably very familiar with the laws of physics, laws of science. And over time, whether it's astrophysicists looking at the speed of light, other planets, what they've been able to identify are these constants that we'll talk about Einstein in a little bit, but these constants over time have not changed. So it does show that God is a God of order and precision. God did present with his creation and for mankind here a plan for redemption for all of us. So whether you're somebody that follows the New Earth perspective or the Old Earth perspective, that shouldn't change. And then God's plan, he did give us Jesus Christ. and that Jesus Christ was the way for us to redemption through his shedding of the blood after becoming a human. Basis for discussion today, though, we're going to try to interpret some facts of nature. So, not the biblical facts, but facts of nature that are consistent, that align with the Bible. Again, Christian theology is to interpret through theological perspective the words of the Bible, but science is really trying to identify what's going on in nature, and this includes creation. Lastly, I'd like to say this. Again, conflicts between this new earth and old earth is not doing the church or the Christian faith any good, because what do they teach in schools? It's being taught by, they have the science classes, and it is being taught by people that are either evolutionists, agnostics, Darwinists. So again, we need to be able to answer these questions for people that we talk to, and especially to our youth. So I'm going to give you just a little background on how things started to fall into place with some of the arguments throughout our history in the church between this new earth, old earth argument. Now, as I go into this, in Genesis 1 talks about creation, all the days of creation. It doesn't give us details. We have no details. So the thinking behind a 24-hour day or a long earth day, obviously Moses and God, through his word, didn't find this should be a hindrance for people to become followers of Christ. So keep that in mind. Now, in the Middle Ages, a lot of the scholars, whether they were Christian scholars or not, and scientists, they were thinking the Earth was 5,600 years old to 9,000 or 10,000 years old. I think sometimes on the news, or you might read that there's some scientists now that think our universe is 50 billion years old. Okay? Well, then there's everything in between. It's 10,000 to 50 billion to 13 million, 13 billion. These are big numbers. But how can we rationalize this when we're trying to give an answer to people that are not Christians, or even in discussions with other Christians? So we're gonna get to that. But looking at the mid 17th century, we've had something that caused. I'm not used to standing in one place. Okay, yeah, that'll work. You've had physicians, you've had people of education, of science, that's come out with different theories. Some of them have really caused real problems with the church. And because of some of this, with the church arguing some of these, I hate to say it, ridiculous comments that have come out of some of these theologians, it's really caused a separation, and we've seen over time some of these old philosophies to really not align with the church are coming back. So this particular one here, liberal, higher critical thinking, that was a philosophy that you're seeing come back today. And it's basically trying to show that with discoveries in science that faith is not valid. Well, we all know faith is critically valid. So over time, this started to change, and you started to have a lot of different arguments. You had Jean Baptiste. He was a French naturalist and a biological evolution proponent. He really had quite a bit of influence, whether it was the church or the scientific community. And there was a lot of discussion and arguments between them. But what that led to was, which maybe the next slide here. led to was we'll see Philip Gross. He was a British pastor, and he came out and said basically all Earth was presented with the appearance of age. So this morning in Greg's service, he mentioned that, as well as one of the different philosophers. Some of the debate from that perspective is God won't lie. Okay, God can't lie. So if He created something that looked old, is that a lie? So that got into a big philosophical battle in society. And again, science was looking back at comments like this with disdain, and this continued to erode Christians' ability over time to talk about the glory of God, because obviously some of the stuff made no sense to science. Then we get down to the later 1800s, and everybody I think in the room has probably heard of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin, he really focused on his theory around evolution, and you'll see this kind of a scenario of his creation going from ape to man. Well, what science, now this is science, is found is there's no connecting link that can show this. So later on in the presentation, I'm going to show you what's being taught in the schools. You can go to about every museum in this country, and you'll see how science is deducing something that's absolutely ridiculous that follows Darwin. Which one? Yeah, the next one. So a lot of objections did come up from the theory of Darwin, and basically some of these objections, it was really refuting or denying that creation was a divine creation with various species. And that various species is very critical to this. Darwinism had also declared life was an evolution of creating different species. Well, what we've been able to find through science is that there's been no missing link found. There's no new created species. There are species, including us, mankind, where there has been some change in us. So if you move from Houston to Alaska with the difference in the weather, your body will grow accustomed to the colder weather over time. So that has changed, and that is an evolution of the body, but it's not creating a new species as Darwin had suggested. Again, from that monkey picture to man, Darwin was trying to show that we were created from a lower species. There was no separation from us, and also that would inhibit us to have a soul and a spirit coming in that direction. So with some of these ridiculous things, and as strong as the church was through the ages, why did Darwin get such a rapid acception? Even up until today, you still hear a lot of it. And it was roughly 10 to 14 years ago that a lot of the summaries that Darwin had were absolutely proven false. And scientists that are that are objective, that do not have a hidden bias, are acknowledging that today, but yet it's still being taught in schools. So again, why was Darwin's theory so accepted? Why did it grow so fast? And the number one line there that's underlined is the world found no scientific evidence to contradict Darwin, and the church also had no evidence to conflict with Darwin other than theology. And some of the theology that came up in the past, I don't think I mentioned it earlier, but it was back around, I think it was Jean Baptiste or Limerick or somebody like that, and they were from the church, they actually said that the earth was created, they gave a specific date, they gave a time, they gave a day, and so with interpretations like that that were coming out of the church, it really created, it gave a platform for science to really trash and continue to push God out of the equation. Moving a little farther forward, I mean, there are all kinds of history, I'm not going to bore you with that, but Henry Morris, who I think Butch mentioned a few weeks ago with his book on Genesis, it's a great book, and he is definitely a young earth theologian. But what his purpose was to create evidence or information that you could communicate, or at least compete with science, the Darwinism. Because again, in the past, the church had no answer for Darwin at the time. So from his book, The Genesis Flood, he created an organization called Creation and Research Society. So it's very similar to this here. It's a group today. This is a publication called Acts and Facts. This is from the Institute of Creation and Research. So it's basically taking what Morris did by creating the CRS to give evidence, and this is pretty good. The ICRA is actually very good. They hired a lot of scientists. The scientists are obviously Christian, so they're doing a lot of good work. I say that with some exceptions. And let's see, this one here. This is another one of their publications. It's Creation Ex Nihilo Through Jesus Christ. So probably 90% of this appears to be spot on. The problem is right at the end they have some voids in their explanation, but yet they're able to come to a conclusion. So as much good as they're doing, there are still some areas that, again, science and even organizations like this don't align. So again, when you're looking at this, you need to, again, stay focused on God's Word, but also know that there is some room where science and the Bible are beginning to align. Which, let me have the next one. Okay. So, on this, talking about, again, the New Earth creationists and the Old Earth creationists, Young Earth creationists are looking at 144 hours, 6 days, or anywhere from 6,000 to 10,000 years ago, the Earth was created. Now, one thing to think about, and we'll address this, is when God created, do we believe that in day one, day two, day three, everything was created in a 24-hour day, or did He create a process, an orderly process, where, let's say, a plant was created? Was that plant full-grown on day one, or was it created in a state that allowed it to grow over a 24-hour period or a longer period of time? So there is some room there, and when we get to some of the definition of day or yom, we'll address that. Again, it's in the discussion on this New Earth and Old Earth, it's very important to continue to remember that God created, and He's revealing stuff to us over time, whether it's in theology or it's in science. Okay, what's the next one? All right, I think probably everybody in the room also knows a gentleman by the name of Sir Isaac Newton. He's actually considered one of the two leading physicists in the world. And you'll see in the blue highlight there, he basically has written, now ye number and length of ye 6 days, by what is said above, ye may make ye first day as long as you please, and ye second day also. So back in some of his discoveries, even though the science community is fighting against God and creation, people like Sir Isaac Newton was seeing that, no, he's believing that God created. But he's leaving room here for even the church to think, okay, these days might be longer than a 24-hour day. I don't know the background of everybody in the room here, where you stand or where you came from with the church, believing in an exact 24-hour day or a longer day or a period of time. I came out of the Assemblies of God Church, and it was definitely a young earth, absolutely. So looking at Scripture, it does talk about God created matter, energy, space, and time. The early church and even early science, when they would talk about this, time was left out. Not quite sure why, but this is more modern science since probably 1850s. This time started to come into this equation. God did prepare the earth to become a privileged planet. We've been able to see through a lot of work around astronomy and astrophysics that a lot of things took place actually before the earth was created. Going back in the scriptures, when it said God created the heavens and the earth, it doesn't give it a specific timeline, but knowing that God is a God of order, it's a lot of scientists that are converting to faith from Christianity are starting to believe, no, this makes sense, because the Bible's not contradicting the Bible in any way, but there is a process that things are taking place, and it can take place in a 24-hour day or a period of time. Going through the creation days around creation of plants and then animals, and then eventually to Adam, there was an orderly progression of things that took place. God could have put Adam on earth first, but would that have made sense? No. There was no food. Basically would have been nothing for Adam to do. So again, it goes back to God is a God of order. Okay, let me have the next slide. Okay. So again, as I mentioned, Genesis does support and allows for biblical interpretation that there was flexibility in creation. Moses didn't detail it, those details, but if you go into Job, there is some more details in Job about the creation and how orderly it was. In fact, Job is probably one of the best scientific references that we have in the Bible. And the fact that it was an older book than what Moses wrote, it's very interesting as it defines the cycle of evaporation of water into clouds, and then clouds to produce our rain. So that's just one example in Job, but there are quite a few things in Job that do indicate that there were processes in place during creation. Okay. Let me have the next slide. All right. Is this one? Yes. Okay. So I think many of you have probably heard about the debate, what does yom mean? That's the Hebrew word for day. But it has different meanings. They don't have the And I'm not a linguist, but I do know that they don't have, in Hebrew, they didn't have the words. They didn't have the vocabulary that we do in English to define and detail things. So Yom is one of those words. Basically, the church and the young earth creationists look at Yom as day as a 24-hour day. But it has other meanings. So it's a portion of daylight hours. It could be sunrise to sunset. It could be sunset to sunset. Then lastly, though, this is the one that with the old earth creationists align with, is it's a segment of time. It's a period of time. And that time is not defined. And they will also talk about in the Bible, there is no place in the Bible where time of creation is defined as a 24-hour day, but a period of time. And looking at looking at processes of creation, plants created, and it has the ability to grow and multiply other plants over time, and plants that are of the same variety. Even today, where somebody will take an almond tree and they'll mute it with a lemon tree. They'll take a branch and they'll stick it on the olive tree, and yeah, they'll both grow, but that doesn't create a new species. Okay. So again, here you've got the four possible meanings of Yom in Genesis, and then just food for thought here. There's a couple other Hebrew words that are translated. Some things very similar. Evening, day, night type of thing. Also means the morning, the beginning of day. So in other parts of the Bible, these words are used in Hebrew and not Yom, which makes it appear Yom is following more into the number 4 category in many ways. Another area, let's see, where is it here? Here it is. So some of the past philosophies, 17 and 1800s, there were some physicists, some ministers that came out, and they actually thought there were 2 creation days. From Genesis 2 and Genesis 1. I'm sure you might have heard that. Well, there was such an uproar in Europe at the time that the philosopher came out and added to a story to make it that everything was created with age, whether it's a plant, a tree, or whatever it was in creation. So this second creation day also created some other issues. But going back to Yom here, and I'm not sure if it's on the slide, but the way the wording in Hebrew is written for Genesis 1 versus Genesis 2 through 6 are different. And then if you look at Genesis, the day 7 of creation, or not creation, when God rested. Well, you use some of the words, definition for Yom as a 24-hour day. It means on day 7, when God rested, he rested for 24 hours. Well, we know that doesn't make a lot of sense. God is still resting because we are in that 7th day of creation. So it gives a little more validity to the word Yom as a period of time. If that time said a 24-hour day is a 30-hour day, it's a 1,000-year day, Again, they go back to the 7th day of creation where God is at rest. So just some food for thought. Next slide.
I have a question.
Yes.
Why do you think they put in the Bible, in the evening and the morning were the whatever day, every verse, and the evening and the morning were the 6th day or whatever? That just seems like it should have some meaning for us, shedding some light on this.
Mm-hmm. But look at Genesis 1:1. Is it the same wording? Which you just described as Genesis 1:2 through the day 6 of creation. So day 1 in Hebrew is actually is stated a little different. So what it tends to show is between day 1 and day 2, like Pastor Greg mentioned this morning, one of the theories is the gap theory. Gap theory believes that when things were created, there was a process of a lot of things were falling into place. Now, whether that took 10 billion years, 40 billion years, we don't know, but when you're talking about 40 billion, 20 billion, it seems outlandish to us. It really does. So what I'm going to show you, there might be an answer to that. Okay? Thanks for the question. Something that I want to show here too is, again, God's a God of order and power. So this is our Milky Way, kind of a fuzzy picture, but that's our Milky Way. And if you look at pictures from the top down, it looks like a disc with these arms coming out. Okay? If you look sideways, it looks pretty much like a flat frisbee. Right? And so if you can imagine an explosion, you have something that explodes. What happens when it explodes? It goes all directions. Exactly. It doesn't just lay out like this. So there is some thinking in science that there was something around the Big Bang, which I'll talk about, when that Big Bang or the explosion took place, there was something there on top and on bottom that held our Milky Way flat. Okay? If there wasn't something there, the Milky Way wouldn't look like that. You know, you'd have all those things everywhere. So now in the Bible, it talks about God is ruler unrolling the firmament. Well, firmament is not nothing. It is something. You'll hear things around dark matter, dark energy. There is something there that's holding things in position. Because you can have gravity, but there's got to be something there for gravity to work with and work for. So some of the new, this is in the last probably year, some of the new thinking around dark energy, matter, firmament, is when God unrolled the universe, again, a God of order, a God of laws of physics. The firmament could have been on top and below and caused this Big Bang to go this way and stay in that form. So just kind of a different perspective there. Something else that I want to point out here is in Romans 8:20 to 22. You can look at that verse, and basically it's talking about the laws of decay. So, second law of thermodynamics means things go from order, progression from order to disorder. Things go from hot to cold. So, in science, we're finding that our universe is continuing to expand. Is it continuing to expand at the same rate it did at creation? No, it's not. And we've been able to, through science, been able to prove that 100%. And again, one of the validity points is, as things cool off, yes, our universe is still expanding. So again, back to the God of creation, did he create the universe at the same size in day 1? It doesn't appear so. It appears that he's created processes for things to continue to happen. And so our universe going from hot to cold in the outer reaches of space as far as we can detect, it's another indication of that. But again, the second law of thermodynamics has been very very appropriate to our universe where we are today, to explain something. Would you go to the next slide? Okay, I'm gonna speed this up to get to someplace. So on here, right there where it talks about order and decay. So what we're finding is that second law of thermodynamics is time has not been the same over time. We've been able to see and prove that time has started at a much faster rate than it is today, and it's continuing to change. So as an example, if you have a clock on the top of the highest mountain in the world, and then down in Salton Sea in California, which is one of the two, or the Dead Sea, lowest places on Earth, those clocks over a period of a year will actually be off a few nanoseconds from each other. So again, there's a lot of new, this is in the past 2 years, a lot of discovery that time dilation, or time is not the same, is looking like it's factoring into the days of creation. So when I say time's not the same, if you look there, if you're traveling 90% of the speed of light, not sound, but light, 5 years equals 10 years. 20 seconds equals 80 years. So this is some of the new findings. So, Butch, let me have the next slide. So what that means, the time's not the same, and it's changing. It appears that there's a possibility that the newer creationists with a 24-hour day or the longer creationists are both right. So whatever belief you have, you both can be right, because time again has not been the same and is changing. Time in outer space, coming from the distant telescope that we launched 6 months ago, the Webb telescope, is pointing into the universe farther than we've ever seen. And we're seeing stars forming in deep space that we've never seen at various points of their creation. And again, in that far outer space, we're seeing that not only time is different, but it's also being bent through gravity, through the solar system. So the picture on the bottom right, that's one of the recent pictures of the universe farther than we've ever seen. It was taken by this that was launched 6 months ago. This is out of NASA. And so you'll see dust in the universe. There's pulsars and quasars being created, and stars. But it all started with the Hubble telescope, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago. So let me have that next slide, Butch. So there's the Webb. One more. So here's some of the proof that you can see stars being formed. See those white lines? They're pointing to sections of these dust clouds in space. Again, what it's showing is in the New Earth argument has always been, well, you get into outer space, we've never seen anything new created because we possibly can't live 13 million years or 13,000 years. Well, we can't, but what we can see is various stages of things being created. So this is all coming from a point of view that the way we're seeing the universe grow is that God created, God is a God of order, uses natural processes. But the Big Bang Theory is making more sense as we're interpreting it. The church has gone both ways. They like the Big Bang, they didn't like the Big Bang, they like the Big Bang. But science and the Bible around the Big Bang are starting to line up quite quickly. Okay, what's the next one? I think we're almost done. Okay, this is a fun one. So I'm going to show there are hidden biases, whether it's church interpreting things or science, but I think science is probably the biggest guilt. One of the hidden biases in science is, see that little character there? Every museum in the U.S. will show either a picture or a skeleton like that. And what it is, this was a monkey that's transitioned, Darwin's theory, into a human. Okay, now Butch, can you see the dark rectangle? Can you slide that over to the side? All right, so if we put skin and fur on that creature with the bones, this is what science is saying where we came from. And what makes this really fallacious, they're showing white eyeballs. The humans are the only creation that have white eyeballs, but yet science is interpreting from that bone structure to this. Now it gets even more ridiculous. Butch, slide over to that skeleton so we show what's behind it. Okay, see those bones there? Those bones were found in an area of about 3 football fields. And so science said, oh, that must be the missing link of Darwin. So they, from those bone fragments that they collected over this big area, I don't know how a creature would have bones spread like that after they're dead, but they found those. They created that skeleton to this thing. So again, this is in every school book being taught, and museum, this progression. So again, you'll see the hidden bias with science. And when I say science, it's not all science. Geology is talking about the Earth, rocks being 20 million years old. Well, right now there's 17 different scientific methods to date a rock, to date a fossil. Well, some of them, they're all accurate, but you got to use them in the right place. If something's 100 years old, you can't use a technique that's used to dating something that's 1,000 years old. And with science, typically, the ones trying to move God out of the equation is trying to do is use the wrong methods to date stuff to show that, oh, our Earth must be 50 billion years old. Well, again, this is the hidden bias that you're seeing. But there's a lot of people in science, and I'm finding that astrophysics and astronomers are actually falling in line more with Christianity than any other science. And I started making a list of all the sciences, and I had 5 pages, single-spaced, and I hadn't even cracked the surface. So there's a lot of sciences out there, but some of them are starting to validate and come into alignment. The book of nature and the book of God are starting to align. And that time dilation happens to be one that's tending to show that both old Earth and young Earth, with these years, maybe are both right because, the changing of time. So, which one more?
Yesterday on Science, Scripture, and Salvation, now that we do so much with DNA, they have found that the DNA of the chimpanzee and the human are so far removed from each other, yet the people that are talking about evolution discount all those areas where they don't line up.
Exactly. So that's one of those areas of science, like biology, is probably has the most atheist Darwinish you can find in there. So there's some sciences that are so biased like that. So another thing where science has done that's really good, archaeologists finding stuff. So they're finding biblical stuff all the time in the Middle East. Right? We found the Dead Sea Scrolls. Well, this is when I lived in Florida, I went to Dr. James Kennedy's church, and one of the doctors that were the teachers there was on a mission, archaeological mission to the Middle East, and they found Sodom. They actually found Sodom. So scientists and philosophers have been trashing Christians for years because where Sodom was supposed to be, it wasn't there. So they said it was a myth. Therefore, the Bible's a myth. Okay? Well, they found it. And one of the ways that they found it is science, where they told them Sodom was supposed to be. It wasn't there. But anyway, this is a really interesting, fun book. But yes, they have found Sodom. Again, Answers to Genesis, they put out a lot of publications. A lot of them are very good. They're definitely Young Earth. This is a Young Earth small booklet from 3 or 4 scientists. But 100% of these 3 or 4 scientists in the shown book are Young Earth book. They go 4 or 5 paragraphs of reasoning, and then they skip to the conclusion that could be number 8. So they're leaving out a bunch. So again, instead of us fighting old Earth and young Earth, fighting with each other, we need to see where there's alignment, and that alignment should be God, Christ, and salvation. And that's it. So again, don't take a real hard look at either young Earth or an old Earth, because it appears now with science, the dilation of time, second laws of thermodynamics, it could be the same thing, just different periods of time. That's it.
Thank you, John. Let's give John a big hand.